light and fair between mountains and seas. Your children salute you, dear land of the free, land of Guyana. Our heroes of yore, both bondsmen and free, laid their bones on your shore. This soil so they hallowed, and from them are we all sons of one mother, Guyana, the great land of Guyana. Diverse though our strains, we're born of their sacrifice, heirs of their pains, and ours is the glory their eyes did not see. One land of six peoples, united and free.
Land of Guyana, to you will we give our homage, our service each day that we live. God guard you, great mother, and make us to be more worthy our heritage. Land of the free.
Hello, good day to you all, and welcome to this Sunday, the 17th December 2023 edition of Nation Watch. Thank you all for joining us from wherever you're joining us, and we trust that you'll stay with us as we go into number 7, part 7 in the series on the Guyana-Venezuela territorial controversy. Joining me for today's conversation is Mr. Raul Lucas, who is an economist, an accountant, a negotiator, and educator. Welcome to Nation Watch, sir.
Thank you very much, Mervyn. It's my pleasure to be here and share my own perspective on this matter with the people of this country.
Mr. Lucas is not a politician. Mr. Lucas is here in his professional capacity to help us understand the outcome of the recently held meeting, December 14th, in St. Vincent at the Argyle airport. Mr. Lucas, I really do appreciate your taking time off to join us on Nation Watch so we can discuss this very, very, very important issue. Many see the Declaration of Argyle as an instrument that lends to maintenance of the region as a zone of peace. Many see the Declaration of Argyle as an instrument that would effectively lead to de-escalation of tensions between Guyana and Venezuela. And in that regard, many hail the outcome of this very important meeting between Presidents Ali of Guyana and Maduro of Venezuela as a success. Others ask the question, how can you realize a zone of peace in the absence of any evidence within this document or any other report that there are conditions specific and binding on both parties, conditions having to do with the express respect for international law, the respect for international treaties to which the countries are party, respect for the outcome of a judicial process, a place where this matter is now being treated with, and respect for the United Nations Charter and this kind of these kinds of instruments. So my question to you, Mr. Lucas, is how do you see this outcome not being founded on any of these conditions, and given the fact that Venezuela is known for breaching agreements, they disregard the 1899 Arbitral Tribunal, they broke the agreement, Protocol of Port of Spain, they have stepped away from the International Court of Justice, which is a product of the Geneva Agreement. They have breached the Geneva Agreement. Would they honor the Declaration of Argyle?
Well, for me to, I think it's fair if I'm going to give an opinion on this particular matter, for me to start by actually examining the contents of the letter that of December 9th that was sent by Prime Minister Gonsalves to Presidents Ali and Maduro. Recall in that letter that Prime Minister Gonsalves informed the presidents that the meeting to which he was inviting them would deal with matters consequential to the border controversy. So you have to sort of unpack what consequential to the border controversy meant in the context of the urgings of various leaders in this region that were identified as part of the process. And so there are two things that we would have seen. In the third and fifth paragraphs of the letter, I think we could get some guidance from there. The third paragraph in particular called for 5 things, one being the de-escalation of the conflict. So there was a clear desire to see something happening in that regard. There was a call for avoiding the use or threat of the use of force by any party, even though one would wonder where Guyana's force would have come from. Respect for international law, seeking, to keep the peace in the region. But that thing also called for face-to-face conversation if we were to attempt to achieve those things. So in that context, I think one could say that there was some sincerity on the part of those who called for the meeting and those who agreed to try and achieve those objectives. And to a large extent, if you look at the joint declaration, one can safely say that at least that aspect of Prime Minister Gonsalves' letter might have been achieved. So in that sense, I agree, even with including the statement that was made by the leader of the opposition, in which we felt a level of satisfaction seeing that this whole question of the easing of tensions, the easing of the anxieties of the people of this country in particular, as a consequence of the document that emerged from the Argyle conference. The other good thing about that is, as we know, dialogue, is something that permits for the sharing of thoughts, and it increases the opportunity for interlocutors to understand each other a bit better. So even though there would be still tensions between Guyana and Venezuela, I think the mere fact that the two leaders were able to press the flesh at a critical time, and in the presence of several others, it, in a way, I think, would bring some ease and comfort to both parties. So from that perspective, one could, agree that the discussion, the outcome of the discussion, was something that you can hang your hat on.
Now, my notes tell me that President Ali committed, one, to a unified approach, government and opposition on this matter. Two, there was a parliamentary motion which fleshed out and resolved on this issue. That there will be no bilateral conversations with Venezuela on the question of our territory. President Ali committed that he was not going to discuss this particular issue. And I believe it to have been a good faith commitment. I still believe that it was honored. The troubling thing is that there are issues recorded in this outcome document that leave some room for perhaps reading different things or different angles out of what is being said here. For example, at paragraph 9. Paragraph 9 says that both states agreed to meet again in Brazil within the next 3 months or at another agreed time to consider any matter with implications for the territory in dispute, including the above mentioned update and joint commission. Though this doesn't say that Essequibo was discussed, it says some other things. It says that the parties recognize that there was a territory in dispute, and as far as Guyana is concerned, there is no territory in dispute. It suggests that this territory in dispute was discussed, but doesn't offer the fruit of the discussion. Is this a question of maybe a blindsided agreement, or is it perhaps the product of negotiations that on the Guyana side could have been stronger than is evident by 9?
Well, I think, your question itself points to what I understand or perceive to be the challenge that our delegation might have had at the Argyle meeting. And it relates to what I consider to be the failure to link or to recognize that the paragraphs in any diplomatic document tend to be related. And so the fact that you went down to paragraph 9 to identify a reference to a territorial dispute points to the fact that we may have missed what the previous paragraphs did to us, and where Venezuela might have recognized that it actually was able to pull the wool over our eyes and sneak in paragraph 9, this reference to territory in dispute, shows that perhaps we were asleep at the wheel. And let me say this. Now, you may recall that in the fifth paragraph of the letter to the two presidents from Prime Minister Gonsalves, while he identified the respective positions of both Guyana and Venezuela with respect to the border controversy, I think you could almost see, the biblical story of Adam and Eve in that paragraph, in which, you see, while both countries were forbidden to pick the fruit of the border controversy in the Argyle meeting, you can see the fruit being offered for consumption in the words that you can find in that letter. There is much for each of you to raise and or discuss on matters consequential to the border. So even though our two parliaments told us that, and even though Prime Minister Gonsalves was aware of that, he still dangled the opportunity for the two parties to discuss matters consequential to the border controversy.
Personal interests?
I am not sure what might be motivating him, but there is evidence out there that might suggest he had something to gain from encouraging a conversation along those lines. But I think that paragraph from in that letter is indicative of the risks that one can encounter when dealing with diplomatic negotiations. And I believe Guyana was led into temptation, and it succumbed to that temptation. Because remember, before President Ali left here for the summit, he kept saying that the border controversy will not be discussed. Even on one occasion, his words were, the ICJ will determine finally the controversy in the Guyana-Venezuela borders. He continued by saying, and I'm quoting, we are uncompromising on this and the respect for international law. So based on what he kept saying before he left here, we understood that no reference or discussion about the matter before the ICJ would take place. But we were actually lulled into it in paragraph 2. And we didn't seem to recognize it, because paragraph 2 made reference to any controversies between the two states, should be settled in accordance with international law, including a reference here to the Geneva Convention. I'm going to come to paragraph 9.
I want to ask you to pause there for a second on paragraph 2. I hope I'm not complicating matters here.
Mm-hmm.
But you spoke to the issue of the Geneva, you spoke to the issue of the ICJ and Guyana's commitment not to discuss it. Venezuela has denied that the ICJ has jurisdiction to hear and determine this matter. And I said clearly it does not recognize the International Court of Justice in this matter. What is interesting is that those two strong positions taken by the two countries, they are opposed to each other, and they find themselves in the document as having been noted. But there is no indication here that the specific issues will somehow find their way into some kind of discussion. And it treats Guyana's position as an assertion. How do you relate this note in paragraph 4? Should this note have been evidenced in this document? does the presence of this note not complicate matters further unnecessarily?
Well, I agree with you that it does. In coming to that, because again, you're showing that there's a linkage, because that reference to any controversies without Guyana making it quite clear that it knew only of one controversy that mattered, by leaving the word any governing controversies without modifying it, meant that the border controversy became or could become the subject of discussions between the two parties and not solely the preserve of the ICJ.
And further, it suggests that there can or will be additional controversies flowing in the future.
Well, from paragraph 9, that's why I said I want to make sure that people understand that these paragraphs are linked. And while in Guyana's mind they may not be, in Venezuela's mind I can assure you, because I've worked with Venezuelan international negotiators for several years when I was in the United Nations. And I mean, they had some of the best negotiators, at least at that time, that I was aware of, including a gentleman by the name of Manuel Perez Guerrero. We used to call him MPG. He was a statesman. He was the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. He was a minister in the Venezuelan government at that time. He was the one who helped to start the OPEC.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he was one of the men who helped Venezuela
Found
the OPEC and so forth. So the point I'm making here is I work with him and I know what they do, because he helped us in our negotiations on the new international economic order that took place in the years that I was a member of Ghana's delegation in the second committee of the UN General Assembly. So I'm saying to you, therefore, that I have no doubt that the Venezuelans knew exactly what they were putting in that document. And so, coming back to paragraph 2, because we did not clarify, or I don't know if they asked for clarification, but it seems to me as if we did not, because we went along with any controversies. We should have said any new controversies. And if that didn't fly, then we should have said, except the one before the ICJ, so that it was clear to Venezuela that we're not talking about that in any forum outside of what we were expecting the International Court of Justice to do. Come to paragraph 4. Venezuela then got us. What we may not have realized is that Venezuela got us to publicly or officially acknowledge its refusal to accept the ruling of the ICJ. Mm-hmm. So even though it's not an agreed clause in the document, Venezuela can say, I told you, and here you said to me, you noted, which means that once Venezuela rejects the outcome of the ICJ, paragraph 2 now governs, of this Argyle agreement, governs what happens in the
controversies.
So the controversy, the border controversy, is gone into a bilateral status framework. And that, I don't think, is what we wanted. So, I think even though, one in diplomatic discussions, you have to read between the lines, always. That is one of the things they always tell you, read between the lines, not only what is on. And it is clear we fail to read between the lines, because it is obvious that Venezuela wanted to make sure that this thing went into bilateral status. That is why, for me, I am very disappointed and dismayed, because this is 57 years of difficult work, diplomatic work, that has gone wrong with it, as far as I'm concerned, with this Argyle agreement. So, That brings me, therefore, to paragraph 9, where we're talking about a dispute. So, again, Venezuela can waive this document in our face and anybody else's face and says, we have agreed that we have some territory in dispute between the two of us, Venezuela and Guyana. What does that mean? It means, therefore, we have to take account, and I don't know if our negotiators took this thing seriously enough, but we have to take account of what actions Venezuela took after the referendum, in which it says it was setting up an office to administer the territory of Essequibo. It was setting up an office to do things, to make decisions about what happens in the Essequibo and so forth. So even though the word Essequibo has not been used, we know that is what they're talking about. Consequently, what we should have done, first of all, we should not have had that word dispute in there. But once it's in there, it means that if we sign a concession to any foreign company to operate in Venezuela, in Essequibo, I'm sorry, to operate in the Essequibo, Venezuela can object. And that becomes a controversy, which now has to go to some form of bilateral conversation.
Here's where it becomes depressing. Guyana's exercised sovereignty over the Essequibo for what? Over 100 years. Guyana owns Essequibo. This document speaks to territory in dispute. Venezuela claims Essequibo as its own. A baseless case that it cannot prove. It has never produced any evidence to support its claim. This document speaks to disputed territory. Venezuela went ahead with the referendum, got approval from the voters, however small the number was, to annex Essequibo as the 24th state of Venezuela. Mr. Maduro went ahead, established a capital town for Essequibo near to the border with Guyana, identified a general, military personnel as governor. His parliament passed a budget, not for the development of Essequibo, but for the defense of Essequibo. So someone is attacking them and taking this Essequibo from them. That's how it's presented. And the two presidents met. There is nothing in this document to say that Venezuela was asked to step back from these decisions, from these positions, from these actions, as part of a series of actions to ensure de-escalation of tensions and to ensure the maintenance of peace. You mentioned a possible controversy in terms of investment. History has established that the Chumachumari hydro project was stopped because Venezuela objected or challenged.
Not too much.
Which one?
It was the Upper Mazaruni.
Upper Mazaruni. Yes, I beg your pardon. Upper Mazaruni. And there was an objection. And while the objection itself may not have been the cause of the deferral of approval, certainly the discomfort, the possible discomfort would have had something to do with the project not coming to life. Are we going back to that place where the same thing that happened with the Upper Mazaruni project can now happen with almost any project in Essequibo?
Based upon the way, the current reading of things, I mean, this document, this Argyle document, joint declaration, does not reference the internal affairs of Venezuela, because Venezuela can do whatever it wants, internally. But we have to be cognizant of the fact that the actions that Venezuela took following the referendum were directed at our Essequibo. And therefore, we needed to be very, very careful in this document not to open any possible opportunity for Venezuela to, insert itself in the management and administration of the Essequibo. But that reference to dispute, we could say what we want. We think of it as controversy. But right now, we have agreed to the word dispute being inserted in here. And while some people might argue, the International Court of Justice uses the word dispute, that is not relevant to us. That, for them, is the way they can handle a matter at the legal level. But for us, the issue is the nullity of the 1899 arbitral award which Venezuela claimed. Its insertion of the word dispute here is saying that we agree that the territory has a problem. In other words, we have sort of walked back our own sovereignty over the by accepting that paragraph 1, they'll try to get in paragraph 2. If they can't get it in paragraph 2, they'll try to get it in paragraph 3. Somewhere in that document, they're going to try to get in what they want. And it is quite clear Venezuela got us in 2 places. In fact, 3 places. Paragraph 2, where it's any controversy. In paragraph 4, where it got us to officially acknowledge its position. And in paragraph 9, where it got us to agree we have a dispute. So we've reopened this whole thing. And, we have left ourselves exposed. I mean, remember, when the Dutch came and they brought people from Africa and enslaved them here in Guyana, the first place they settled them was in the Cameroon. You don't have any Venezuelans or Spaniards around here. So quite clearly, I mean, that alone should always stay in your head, that the Essequibo, significant parts of the Essequibo was under the control of, those colonizers of Guyana, at that time. And we should, that is something that's supposed to stay with us. Anytime you go out to talk about Guyana and you're beginning to talk about the controversy, these are things that must begin to emerge in your mind so that you're always looking out for any risk that could be associated with any language that would be used in any diplomatic document.
You said something that jumped out at me. We have reopened this whole situation. We have reopened. We have struggled with this territorial situation even before independence. As a nation, we have managed it responsibly. We have been on top of the situation of foreign policy. Our foreign service officers have been on top of this. Our capital has been speaking to other capitals across the world, to other organizations of states across the world, CARICOM, OAS, non-aligned. A lot of work has gone into this, and you said something else that jumped out at me. We have walked away from 50 odd years of diplomatic effort. When this matter was referred to the International Court of Justice, I think all Guyanese felt that this was the right way to go. This was going down the road of resolution. This document, in your assessment, says that we have stepped back, says that we have reopened, and says that we have abandoned certain positions, if I'm reading you right. Is that the price of peace coming out of Argyle, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines?
Well, you opened this conversation referring to Venezuela's failure on several occasions to, what was this? Venezuela's, failure on several occasions to actually, honor decisions that it might have been a part of in earlier times. Why do we believe that Venezuela is going to necessarily honor even what might come out of Argyle? Venezuela will only honor what it gets, what it has control over. As long as Venezuela does not have control over an issue emerging out of Argyle, it's going nowhere. It knew, Venezuela realized that the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, could bring this thing to finality, and it may not be the beneficiary of the decision, whatever decision might come out of the ICJ, and that's the reason why it decided upfront to say it's rejecting the ICJ. Venezuela doesn't want this matter to be resolved because it knows that it has greater power than Guyana. And as long as it could keep Guyana in check, then it's happy. Remember, so 60 years now, Venezuela has been telling its own residents that the Essequibo belongs to them. And there's no way a court ruling that is definitive and final and binding on the two parties would allow Venezuela to, and that was not favorable to Venezuela, would allow it to go back to its citizens and say, we were wrong for 60 years. There's no way. So Venezuela does not want this matter to be resolved.
It will lose a political drum to appeal to the citizens.
And remember, this is not just Maduro here. The opposition in Venezuela is more hawkish on the Essequibo than Maduro, or they might be now equally hawkish, given the way Maduro is operating. But the entire Venezuelan population and political structure believe that the Essequibo is theirs because that's what they have told.
Well, I read a report that one of the opposition presidential contenders in Venezuela has made it clear that were he to be elected president next year, he will move all Guyanese out of Essequibo, but that's a whole different story. Following December 14th, Argyle, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines, Mr. Maduro returned home to Venezuela, gathered his generals, and said to them that this issue of Essequibo, and he reiterated to them that Essequibo belonged to Venezuela. That's his thing. That this issue of Venezuela's alleged ownership of Essequibo or baseless claim to Essequibo would be settled by regional bodies. He named CELAC, which is chaired by Ralph Gonsalves, and CARICOM, whose chair I think is Mr. Skerritt at this time, as the two bodies that will resolve this issue. And he made the point to them that no hand of any international organization outside of that or any other country will be allowed to intervene. What do you read from such a position, such a statement?
Well, we acknowledge that position when we noted Venezuela's reluctance and refusal to respect any decision coming out of the ICJ. And so in, agreeing that talks will continue under the auspices of CELAC and CARICOM, any other group within the region, is consistent with what we seem to have agreed to in the Argyle document, in the joint declaration. So it's not, it's I don't think people realize how much we have, complicated or made, or I should say, render impotent any decision that might emerge from the ICJ's deliberations on this matter. It's a serious challenge. It's a serious challenge. That's what they're telling us. That's what they have forced us into.
But I mentioned the name Ralph Gonsalves not without careful consideration, because paragraph 8 says that Ralph Gonsalves, even after he ceases to be pro tem chairman of CELAC, will continue in this role. What is so special about Ralph Gonsalves as it relates to this role? We have discussed on this program last Sunday, don't know if you had the opportunity to look at it, Ralph Gonsalves' address to the UN General Assembly, where he carried the Venezuelan flag in his presentation, where he, as Ambassador Austin described it, carried water for Maduro in that presentation, decrying the imperialists, as he called them, referring to the proverbial golden eagle and the hand of interference and the unlawful trade blockade against Venezuela and all these different things. And then he benefited from tremendous, not he, but his country benefited from debt write-offs from the Republic of Venezuela. He refers to President Maduro as my friend Nicholas. I mean, this is Christmas season and Nicholas has some significance here too. But in all of this, after his term comes to an end at CELAC, he, agreed to by the two parties, will remain engaged in the same role. Why Ralph Gonsalves? How is he become so important and almost indispensable to this process?
Well, I can't speak for Ralph Gonsalves. I certainly can't apply sainthood to Maduro. But, I guess we needed a mechanism. And since the two mechanisms happen to be in our region, and Ralph Gonsalves is part of one of them right now, I guess he might have been able to use his influence as the current pro tempore chairman to actually persuade the incoming chairman, since it's a Caribbean CARICOM country that is part of this process, for him to continue being involved in this. I don't know what special contribution he would be able to make to resolving this issue, but that's where we are right now. I think we all need to recognize that we are faced with a challenge. And, I think we have to, sad to say, but we all have to rally around finding a way to help this government ensure that this country does not become the victim of any manipulation or machinations of any leader within this region or even outside of the region.
Mr. Lucas, we're running swiftly all the time. Maduro has said very clearly that investors in the Essequibo region, and I imagine that extends to our maritime economic zone as well. He says that he has given them 3 months to vacate, pick up and pack up and move out. And this document speaks to controversies, which suggests that if these people don't agree with him and they continue to embrace the sovereignty of Guyana over these territories and the binding nature of their legal contracts with Guyana, and they remain and continue as I know they would, we'll be talking about a controversy emerging in Maduro's head based on this document. And this document also says how it should be treated with. What does the economic prospects, what do the economic prospects in Guyana's territory, the county of Essequibo particularly, how does it look in view of the outcome of this meeting and the positions expressed by Maduro?
Well, I think time will tell. As you said, he has given companies 3 months in which to declare their intentions. We don't know what they will do, but what we do know is if the Essequibo falls into the category now of disputed territory to be addressed outside of the process that we have sought to have it addressed, which is the ICTA, then, we run the risk of losing the ability to earn as much as 75% of our GDP, because about 75% of it comes from the Essequibo as a consequence of our gold, as a consequence of our forestry operations, and now as a consequence of the maritime business with respect to oil and gas. So, because half-year report, 2023 half-year report said that the oil industry was contributing about 68% of our GDP. Gold and forestry were contributing another, 7-8% along those lines. So you can imagine what will happen to us, where our, economic strength would be diminished significantly.
And our indebtedness as a nation.
And in the meantime, we would have racked up some debt as a result of careless spending of the money in the natural resource fund. And you can see we have already begun to run into trouble, because I think someone reported last week, last Thursday, I think it was, that we couldn't pay more than 6.5% increase to public servants because of all the spending that was being done in other areas of this economy. It's fascinating when, of course, 2 months ago, you increased your oil production by another 220,000 barrels. But the fact of the matter is, all of that now could be at risk as a consequence of, this Argyle document. Because we will have to find a way to deal with it. It will become part of the controversy if we are not careful. So I'm saying, unfortunately, we have to find a way. We have to, we have to come together to find a way to preserve our execrable. We don't have a choice now. This is what we have been left with as a result of Argyle. Simply because we either refuse to allow certain paragraphs to get into that document or certain language to remain unclarified in that document.
So there will be tremendous peril there for Guyana because the borrowing has gone, we've gone to our necks in borrowing. Our debts are we're drowning in debts, but the reliance is on the projected revenues from the oil and gas sector.
Yeah, but the only good thing about that is the money is going into an account that we control. But that account is in a third country. And if the third country has an interest in how this matter is resolved, and it feels that, because something you've got to keep in mind is that foreign policy interests are not static. And there are countries today who might be aligned with us, who tomorrow may find a reason not to be aligned with us.
So like you're talking about some CARICOM states here.
Well, there's some CARICOM states, but there are some even bigger and important states around the world who could very well, have an impact on access to the funds that we have in the United States fund. So, it's unfortunate, but we now have to broaden our minds as we think of how we deal with resolving this problem where the escrow is concerned, where our territorial integrity is concerned. And I think all of this comes from the fact that, in my view, the PPP government never took this matter seriously. And the evidence is almost in front of us. Can you imagine 2 of our 3 border countries don't have ambassadors? And for quite a while now, Brazil doesn't have an ambassador. Venezuela doesn't have an ambassador. Okay, we have identified somebody to eventually go to Venezuela. But Brazil, we haven't even identified anybody. And Brazil is supposed to be one of our most important allies in all of this. But yet we don't have even an ambassador proposed.
And we moved one of our better ambassadors from Brazil and sent him someplace else. Not sure where he is.
No, as far as I know, the ambassador we had in Brazil is here.
Is here in Guyana.
Yeah. The one we had in Suriname
Is in Canada.
who was there a very long time, is now in Canada. But we have replaced him. But we now have 2 empty seats in the 2 critical areas.
We will continue to discuss this issue. We are, for now, for today's program, out of time. I'd like to thank you very much, Mr. Lucas, for once again agreeing to participate in this program, Nation Watch. We are on Watch for the Nation.
Yeah.
And for bringing your perspective to the issue. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mervyn Williams. I'm your host. I thank you once again for joining us. I thank you for staying the course of the program with us. And as we move closer to Christmas, we're not so certain that we'll be with you next Sunday. But if you don't see us next Sunday, please accept our very best wishes for a Merry Christmas. I know how difficult it would be, particularly for public servants, to enjoy Christmas in the really traditional sense, having regard for the fact that you have received the meager 6.5 and giving you more, 6.5% increase on your salaries and wages, representing way below 1% of your eventually final budget 2023 number. I think it's somewhere over $900 billion, I believe it is. And our public servants manage only a meager 6.5% increase, which is way below 1% of your national budget for 2023. Notwithstanding that, Christ is the reason for Christmas. Christ is the reason for the season. Until we meet again, God bless. And if you don't see me next Sunday, Merry Christmas to all of you.
Land of Guyana, of rivers and plains, made rich by the sunshine and lush by the rains. Say a